product. Senior shared space.
We're gonna spend.
Okay. And that way, by doing that design,
Right.
one can go
Yeah, that's a
before
good
the
thought,
other
Steve.
without compromising the end. Because if you wind up, when I start looking at it, if you wind up dropping one on one
That
side,
way,
one on the other,
December
your infrastructure,
December meeting.
whatever infrastructure and utilities.
You are good. You just spread out as far as you
To
need.
consider.
They've had an initial needs discussion.
A lot of fun, lot of exciting possibilities.
I think we can have put together our thoughts on it. Bring it back in February.
Hello, guys.
Hello, hello. Good to see you. Yeah, I think so. I'll scooch it over.
Good, I'm gonna get educated tonight.
Patrick.
Good. I'm sitting between two
I've been bringing my
Friends in the education community here in Meridian.
You know, I went through everything.
You're saying you're between a rock and a hard place, Steve? Is that what you're saying?
I'm saying you're both probably between a rock and a hard place.
I know you
What
better.
they're only gonna show here is like what's up there, so we'll show one thing, but here you can like, and that's why I didn't, you couldn't print it, this is the packet, so look at how many pages it is, and then all of that.
Yeah, how's your son doing?
Well, he's
I
fine.
can just set it
He
here.
didn't really have any symptoms other than congestion.
Yeah.
You know, I just did it, so it's kind of fresh.
All right.
I was expecting to be a different conversation.
All right, it is 6:01 p.m. And we will call this meeting of the Senior Community Center Task Force to order. It is October 22nd, 2024. We'll begin with a roll call. Chair Hendrickson is here, Patrick Malley.
Here.
John Hood.
Here.
Josh Robertson.
Here.
Jan Maisner.
Here.
Steve Bagnosi.
Here.
And we have Mary Ferris sitting in for Amanda Lick today.
Thank you.
So thank you for joining us. And Michelle Steed, who is not present at this time. Next up on our agenda is public remarks. So if there are members of the public who wish to make public remarks, we'll follow the same rules that we do at our township board meetings. I don't see any green cards, so we'll have to wing it. If you want to grab a slip of paper there and just give us your name, that way we can have that for the meeting minutes afterward. Comments are limited to 3 minutes. And we'll have you come up to the podium and address the task force as
Do
you
you
do.
want me in public or
Public would be great if you want. I mean,
can I comment during the meeting?
well, I guess you are sending Steve, yes, to sit on the task force tonight?
I think Peggy didn't get a reply from and her request, so we weren't
I
sure.
don't remember seeing a request from Peggy.
Okay,
Sorry, I must have missed
they
that.
have two of us sit.
I see. Well, I believe we had moved forward with just the one at this time. So you're welcome to make your comments, and then Mr. Bagnosi will join us for that. So first we have Barbara O'Kelly.
From 2576 Wood Hill and on the Senior Center Advisory Board. And my main concern is I think we need to be looking at, besides at the site, looking at what's going to go on the site. And so I wanted to, again, give folks the building on the last survey, or the last planning, the last task force. From their floor plan, I did a modification that was approved by the Senior Center Advisory Board of what the needs of the senior center would be in that space. And so I thought this would give folks some of you had this already, an idea of what we do now, what we need, and how we would use the space. So I hope that can help you to one to Steve, to Tim and Dan too.
Terrific, thank you. We'll make sure this ends up in the communications.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Was proposed in
So if there are any questions, I would be glad
Original.
to answer them.
In the last group.
I also sent an email to
I think this is what came out of this.
Tim
Copy.
and asking about and Dan asking about the feasibility of adding a second story.
Can you speak into the mic?
Yeah, if you would, please. Just-
I sent an email to Tim and Dan asking about the feasibility of adding a second story to the Parks and Rec building now. That was Sherry's idea. She thought that the first floor then would be ideal for a senior center, and the second floor could be the Parks and Rec offices. So I would love to know if there's an answer to that.
Great, thank you. Any other members of the public wishing to speak this evening? All right. Seeing none, then we'll close public remarks at 6:05 PM. Next up on the agenda is approval of the agenda. We have the agenda as presented in our packet this evening here before us. Do we have a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Moved by Member
I
Robertson?
believe there was a communication about adding a public comment at the end.
Yep, so
can
we'll
amend
go
it,
ahead,
add that.
we'll make the motion and then we'll talk about any
Okay.
amendments that are necessary. It's been moved by Member Robertson. Any seconds?
I'll second for the purpose of getting into discussion.
Thank you very much. Seconded by Member Bagnosi. Yes, Member Maisner is correct. We did receive a communication earlier this week from a resident who wished to add public remarks to the end. Do we have any objections to that? I see none. I see some shaking heads. So then I'll move to amend the agenda to add public remarks between items 8 and 9, which is where it typically stands for the Township Board. Do you have a second for that motion?
I second.
Okay, second by Member Bagnosi. So then all in favor of the amendment, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion to amend carries. And now on the agenda, do we have any further discussion on the agenda? Seeing none, all those in favor of the agenda as amended, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? And the motion carries. Next up, we have approval of minutes from our September 23rd, 2024 meeting. So thank you to our staff who've captured a good deal of the discussion there. We have a motion on the agenda, on the minutes rather, from that September meeting.
So moved.
Moved by Member Robertson. Do we have a support?
I'll support.
Support by Member Malley. Any discussion or changes to the minutes? Seeing none, all those in favor of approval of the minutes as presented, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? And the motion carries. Okay, so next up, we have communications from the public. We do have a number of communications that we received that were presented in our packet, and those that were not have been forwarded along to us by our staff that what came in after print of the packet. Is that correct?
Correct. And while I briefly have the floor, if you'll indulge me for a moment, Mr. Supervisor, I just want to confirm whether or not the task force would prefer to receive those emails directly, or would you prefer to continue to get them as forwards from me? I can set I can ask IT, thank you, to change the way it's done. Essentially, we have two ways of doing this. The township board, if you email board@meridian.mi.us, it goes directly to the township board's inboxes. Whereas if you email planning commission at meridian.mi.us, it comes to me and my staff, and we distribute them as necessary. We can do it either way. Right now, this is set up as the planning commission style to make sure that the messages make it in. We can absolutely change it over, but wanted to bring that up this evening, given that we are now moving.
Thank you. Members, would you like to receive those emails directly or wait for the packet?
I'd like to get them from the manager.
Yeah, same here.
Okay. Sounds like we have consensus to await your forwarding them
Okay.
along to us.
Thank you.
I guess I'd like to add a small caveat to that.
Sure.
That we get them as expeditiously as possible. Some of these are fairly detailed. So I don't know how, if you get something like 3 weeks ahead of the meeting, if we could, from my perspective, if I could see what's available a week before the meeting, that would be helpful.
We will make sure that the task force gets them as soon as I can get them out.
Okay. I don't need them the day they come in if they come in tomorrow, but just so that we have about a week to digest them.
Maybe in batches, as
Yeah,
quickly as we can.
yeah, I don't need them one for one. Batches is fine.
Understood.
Okay. All right. That concludes item number 6 and item number 7. So we've got some items to follow up on from our last meeting. The first being usage of the current senior center. I know that Director Wazinski has gotten some data, and we've also received some information via email from the senior center supplementary to what was in the packet. Would you like to go through that for us, please?
Sure, thank you, Supervisor Hendrickson. Hello, Task Force. So, per the request of the task force, we've collected and synthesized the 2024 Meridian Senior Center membership and usage metrics to date. So January through September is the numbers that we were working from. Please know that I worked with our Senior Center coordinator, Sherry Wisdom. We reviewed multiple reports. We went through numbers and checked and double-checked to ensure the most accurate data possible. In your packet, I have put together the analysis of what we looked at. So you can see here that currently we have 383 members that are signed to the Meridian Senior Center. Of those members, there's 200 inactive members. What that means is that of those 208 members, they've at least attended one type of event. Those events can occur, they can be different types of activities. And so those activities, there's multiple activities, but I kind of consolidated them here for you. But arts and crafts, special events, educational events, fitness and exercise, games, health and wellness, library resource sharing, and some off-site events as well. So with that, we looked at some previous data that our Senior Center Advisory Board member, Ms. O'Kelly, had also kind of expanded upon. But we did notice a temporary reduction in membership as a result of the pandemic, as assumed. But the membership has now been increasing steadily. For example, there was 483 members in 2019 prior to the pandemic, 238 members in 2023, but we've now added 97 new members since June of 2023. So the membership is increasing. Some of the things that we're doing to get the word out and making, ensuring that we are marketing and people are receiving the information. We put it in the Parks and Rec Playbook, which is our monthly electronic newsletter. The Senior Center uses Facebook as well as 517 Living. That's a relatively new platform that people are using to get the word out about events and other things happening in the 517 area code. Next door, then they use the Senior Preferences, which is a resource guide, and then they send a brochure generally every 2 to 3 years, but the brochure went out this year, so that's really just giving the information of what the center has to offer, what the membership rates might be, and some of the other things that you might need to know if you wanted to become a member, and then any outreach events as available. See here, the other thing I just wanted to note is as a department, we have other 55 plus groups that are outside of the senior center for various reasons. Generally just have activities that they prefer over some activities that are offered at the senior center. But just so we know, we have 3 main groups, 2 of them being pickleball groups, one at Towner, one at Hillbrook. Of those 2, there's probably 80 daily players that demographics are not collected, but anecdotally are in the 50 plus range that generally play those, usually during the day, so a little more available for folks that might not be working full time. And then we also have our 55 plus fitness group, and they meet 3 times a week at Central Park Pavilion. They do some low impact types of fitness activities. And then in the winter, they move into the mall to do that. So I just wanted to note that too, that we have some other groups that are senior specific that I wanted to just bring up. I hope that this is helpful in decision-making, and appreciate your thoughts tonight. And if you have any questions or any follow-up or any other data that you might think is pertinent.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Task force members, do you have any questions of Director Wazinski on the information that she's provided here?
Just a quick
Nosy?
quick observation. I see the trend is such that we should be back to pre-COVID numbers next year. So that when we look at, I would encourage people who are using this data to use those 2019 figures in terms of looking at capacity, scheduling things. Okay.
Thank you. Other questions or comments? I'm curious, demographically, do you know what the township's demographics show for 55 plus?
So you're looking at
Just so we can get a sense,
township-wide,
just so we can
yeah.
get a sense of.
No, that's a great
500 if we're
question.
looking at the pre-numbers.
So the way our demographic age range with the census, it's 65 plus. So at 65 plus, Meridian Township, as of, would have been 2020, was 16.6% of our population is 65 plus.
Okay.
Is that what you were asking, Supervisor?
That would probably be around 5,000,
Okay.
all parkish. Okay. if
So
you
we've
look
got
at-
about 44,000. You said 16%?
16.6.
Now you're gonna do it on a calculator. We'll see how close I was with mental math.
7,500 approximately.
Okay. Someone's already faster with a calculator than I can be.
Yeah, that's
Yeah, just about 7,000.
Director Opsmer. That's why we have these folks as managers.
So, and it's just a good idea of sort of what percentage of our senior community is using it based on just purely age. Obviously, some folks are not going to be able to, for other reasons, but, that's sort of our cap for what we could see in the future.
Yeah, another interesting demographic, not truly interesting, but male to female ratio in Meridian Township is 52 to 48%, where at our senior center, our female population's it's 80 plus percent too. So something just to consider if we're seeking out membership.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Robertson.
I have one quick question,
yes.
sorry, just kind of thinking about it. Not that we need to, me personally, need to report on this, but kind of taking the 2020 to 2023 timeframe out of the equation, kind of an anomaly, hopefully never to be repeated in our lifetimes. What was the membership or usage like, maybe from like 2010 to 2019? Was it a steady kind of growth? Was it plateaued? I'm just kind of curious from like maybe using a better reference of time.
Yeah, that's a great question. I did not review pre-2019, so all those reports we can pull easily. Takes quite a bit of working through some of those numbers. I'm not sure if anecdotally, I can look into that for sure, if that's something that you feel is.
More of just curiosity, nothing, I don't want you, unless for me personally, I don't think you need to go down too far of a rabbit hole, but I was just kind of curious from like a metrics perspective, knowing the last 3-4 years have been very wonky. So.
Yeah, from what I've heard is pre-pandemic, it was relatively,
With just the total membership count, would that be for that 10-year period? Would that satisfy what you're looking for?
Yeah, I mean, that'd be great.
Rather than get into the weeds?
Yeah.
Okay.
we can do that.
Thank you for this. This is very helpful though.
Member Flores. Yeah.
Director Rosinski,
Yes.
the numbers you cited for 48 and 52% for gender breakdown, was that specific to the 65 plus age group or was that overall?
That's overall Meridian
That's
Township.
overall. Do we have anything for the 65 plus?
Not within the census data that I pulled, but we probably could dig in.
I was just curious if what that reflected. So, thank you.
Yes?
All right. Any other questions or comments on usage? No? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next up is item 7B, which is the needs assessment. Cultural Manager Schmidt is here to talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so we, both Director Wazinski and I had some conversations with firms. Certainly doable. I am going to give you a rough idea of what this would look like, I think, under any scenario. So we currently have Progressive still under contract for work on the senior center. So I will be candid, that is the easiest path to go if we choose to do this. I will also be candid and tell you that we are going to be retreading a lot of the ground we did previously. And so if we go down this road, we will see a lot similar things. But likely the way this goes is that the November meeting, we would probably recommend bringing in whoever the consultant is to have that sort of kickoff with discussion with the task force about perceived needs, where we've been, where we're going, then have them specifically likely reach out at that point for a meeting with the Senior Center Advisory Board between the November meeting and the December meeting. After that, then is a bit of a choose your own adventure. Then we get into the idea of doing another public charrette at some point in probably January. At that point, you don't want to, as a planner, we don't like doing things in December because you never get as many people as you think you're going to get. So we'd probably recommend we push that off until January, do some charrette, do a charrette or two. We would probably also at that point, not necessarily go forward with as much detailed design as we did previously and keep it more at the conceptual level, at least to do some space planning to get us an idea of pending the discussion and potential decision on the sites to proceed with this evening. It will be beneficial to have them do some layout work for us, but not necessarily at the specific level we did before. I think because of the fact that we were pretty set on the site and it was a pretty specific box, we needed to do a little more work up front with Yonkers because of just the nature of that building. If we're building new especially, it's more of a conceptual layout at this point that this will fit the needs that have been identified. And so then we would probably bring that information back. We would probably try and shoot for the February meeting so that give you guys at least one full meeting to talk about it and then a meeting to make a decision. But worst case, it comes at the March meeting for some final action. So it's certainly doable. If the task force would like to move forward with this, again, some of it will be retreading ground we've already touched, and so as staff, as the interim manager, I am obligated to tell you that, and I feel like a lot of the information will be out there already, but we can certainly make it happen and focus more on the conceptual design and layout as opposed to getting into some of the details that we did before.
Do you have any idea on what that might cost?
It's going to be, so previously we spent, I think, $31,700 on the initial proposal. It obviously won't be that high because we're going to sort of cut off some of the end design and rendering, but it will be every bit of 20 grand is my guess.
Okay. Any questions from, yes, member first.
Dr. Smith, would that be for one location or multiple locations, the conceptual design?
So I think it's going to, so the beginning of the process will be in general, right? What are the needs? What do we want? What do we don't want? Things like that. As we get to, if we go multiple sites, we are going to have to do multiple layouts, obviously, and see what works best. That is not going to add a tangible amount. I mean, the needs assessment process itself is still going to follow this path. Mm-hmm. And what will happen is once you get towards the end, we'll go, okay, we need this and this. Mm-hmm. So it's not a major difference. I would not consider that a deal breaker.
Okay. I was just curious because it makes sense to me that we're looking at multiple options, and as we narrow those down, then we're getting into conceptual designs.
I mean, ideally, we would be on one site, no more than two.
Yes, I would agree. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Member Hood.
Thank you for the information, Director Schmidt. Could you maybe bring me into the loop a little bit on the last task force and work was done. Is there a square footage that we're trying to look for, like a minimum, maximum square footage for each of those two scenarios, a standalone senior center, and community center?
So I don't think anything's etched in stone, but all along, it's kind of been, senior center is roughly about 10,000 square feet now, so I think from a pure replacement perspective, you're gonna have to hit at least that, most likely. Now, could we design it more efficiently if we were building a building from scratch? Sure. Maybe there is some play there, but 10,000 is a fair number on the senior side. The community center side, really what we found, especially with the Yonkers space, that drives it is, how many basketball courts do you want to put in?
Sure.
We very quickly found that is what ate up the space. So I think, based on our initial conversations, sort of that 40 to 50,000 square foot range is probably ideal for at least the discussion that had occurred before. Now, if we go through another needs assessment process and, for whatever reason, get to a point where we're like, we do not need 2 basketball courts, we just need 1. That cuts off a substantial amount. But I think, as Director Wazinski would point out, one of the things that came out of the community survey this year was indoor recreation. So it's clear that the demand is there. I don't know that we could ever meet it. I mean, there's always going to be a group that wants more space. And so I think what you're looking at, to shorten my answer finally, is you're looking at a 10,000 square foot senior center, or you're looking at somewhere around a 40,000 square foot community center.
Thank you.
The 40,000 square foot, including the senior center, or in addition to
That
this?
would be total, I think.
Total, okay.
Yeah, because I think at that point, right, you're going to have design benefits to having 2 facilities together, right? You're not going to have as much hallway space and as much office space and as much bathroom space as you would have separate, right? Some of those functions, back of house functions, can combine.
Thank you.
Sure. Other members with questions? Mr. Magnosi.
I guess I have a question about I'll fast what's coming into my head. You've presented different sites. If we were to put a constraint on this phase that the building be able to fit on whatever sites we still have in the running? I mean, how generic can we do this stage is really what I'm asking.
Are you talking about the stage of deciding
How big,
the site?
not the site, how big the facility?
Well, so I think that, this is an interesting discussion, right? Because there's a couple ways to attack this problem. And I think one of the things that Superintendent Hood was talking about at the last meeting was the idea of doing your sort of needs assessment up front.
Right.
And then determining the space you have available. That's not the approach we've taken. And that's not the approach we've taken for the last 2 years, because there are a limited number of spaces.
Right.
So if my needs assessment comes back and tells me that I need 22,000 square feet of space for the senior center, I only have a very limited number of sites that can fit on. And so that's why we have taken the approach of trying to nail the site down first.
Okay.
Because if I don't want to go through a process and get to an idea that we want X, and then I have to tell you, well, the only way I can do X is if you spend $10 million on this vacant piece of land, kind of thing. And so that's why we have all along really focused on, and this was how the first task force went as well.
Yeah.
We focused on the sites up front because there were people had a lot of questions, right? There was the immediate question of the space out back. And it took us a minute to realize, oh yeah, it's in the floodplain. But once we start knocking those sites off, it became apparent there are a limited number of spaces to be. So that's why we've taken this approach, as opposed to going through the needs pie in the sky sort of discussion up front and then not being able to follow through.
So what is the target to essentially get down to acceptable sites?
That is
What is the target time frame?
6 months ago. candidly.
Okay,
I think
so,
from a staff's perspective, if we can't walk out of this evening with a single or a pair of sites to proceed on, we have a difficult time meeting the mandate that was established at the township board level of having a decision ready for April of '25.
all right. So what I'm hearing is the primary to be done for tonight is to go through those sites.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Our
Okay.
follow-up on the needs assessment was
All right.
to
Okay.
follow up on that question, because that question also came up. And if that is still, if there is still a desire by the task force to proceed on some path of a needs assessment, we're happy to do so. We just need that that is, that's the follow-up from the last meeting we need direction on as well.
Okay.
Member Hood.
Yeah, thank you. And if I can clarify then, so we're looking at building. We're looking at building a new, building on a vacant site is,
We have not identified a viable existing building to put either of these facilities
okay,
in.
great. That's what I need to know. Yeah, thank you. So then we're looking at a site that would accommodate at least a 10,000 square foot senior center or up to a 40,000 square foot community center.
That seems to be what the choices are.
Okay.
More or less.
That is a guiding criteria, right? So, yeah, okay, thank you.
Any other questions on the needs analysis? So it sounds, excuse me, it sounds like you need some form of assent on whether or not we would like to move forward with a needs analysis as well, if we're going to have that meet the timeline that you just laid out. Is that an accurate statement?
That is accurate. We would like to cut this loose, and like I said, ideally, I think the November meeting would be that sort of initial needs discussion with the task force, and then start the roadshow, as it would be.
Members, do we have any thoughts on if we want to give the thumbs up to move forward on initiating a needs assessment? Member Baisner.
Well, I know there's been discussions on community center, senior center combined, senior center standalone. I think before we would dive into a needs assessment, that decision would have to be made. I'm guessing probably by the township board, if that's the direction. I don't know how you do, maybe how, it would really narrow the scope of the needs assessment if we knew it was senior center only versus an entire community center, senior center.
I don't necessarily disagree, but I think the task that we received from the township board was to sort of run both options.
Okay,
And that's why we've
okay,
been providing that sort of direction.
all right.
Member Bagnosi.
What about, I'm just putting this out there, what about if we were to tweak the combined option to say, senior center first, and then we'll add on a community center? With the understanding that the design needs to accommodate getting there.
That is certainly a viable option. It's going to make our next discussion much easier, because there are an extraordinarily limited number of locations where that will work.
Yeah. I mean, we were tasked with two things, right? To present two options in April, one being a standalone senior center, one being a joined senior and community center. Now, I agree that if we can find a way to, design both, but the senior center essentially being a detachable option, right? And saying, we can do this, just this third of it, or just this, whatever the numbers math to. That might be easier from a needs assessment, and also easier to inform our next decision. I mean, really, not to get too far ahead of ourselves, but there appear to be only maybe 2 or 3 sites in the list that you provided that could accommodate a joint facility. Member Valley.
But wouldn't it be the case that that option of a detachable senior center, you'd lose some of the back of the house efficiencies, of course, that you had mentioned earlier, right?
So I think it's a matter of how you design it, right? I think at that point, that's when we have a conversation with our consultant about, okay, here's the plan. Phase 1, senior center, parks offices, senior offices, all the necessary underground utility for both phases. Phase 2, basketball court 1, jazzercise room. Right. At that point, and then through our needs assessment, we try and prioritize what we think is how this transformer fits together.
I don't, we've worked with Progressive now for a while. They do a very good job.
Okay.
And my understanding is if we gave them this mandate and they understood what we were asking for, they could provide us with a needs assessment that met that particular path of thinking.
How long does a needs assessment take?
You said about 4 or 5
So
months?
I think it's easy for us, I'm fairly confident in saying that we could get to results by the February meeting. Knowing that December is a bit of a dead zone.
Mayor Harris.
Is the only constraint with not combining the senior center and the community center is the property size? So I'm feeling like it's not entirely clear yet what we're really going for. And if it's based on the property size, that makes sense. If it can only accommodate a senior center. But if our desire for the community is to have a combination structure,
Yeah, I think from the discussion we had at our last decision point on the township board level, the constraint was also money. It was far more expensive to operate, to build and operate the joint center as it was presented at that time. Now, we're looking at something different, right? That was 90,000 square feet. We're looking at more like 45, it sounds like. So that would reduce the cost. But one of the biggest bunch of feedback that we heard from other board members was that the operating costs in perpetuity were going to be too much. It would require not insubstantial millage to be passed by the residents. And so, yes, size is absolutely a limiting factor, but making sure that we can remain cost efficient was also something that was of great concern. As well as, the other feedback we got was that we wanted to maintain or add to the amount of space that the seniors had at their current senior center.
seems like in looking through some of the options and locations, there are certainly some locations that would not accommodate the larger building, so.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I personally don't have any issue with moving forward with the needs assessment. I think we'll have some, shortcuts because we already have started the ball down this process the last time around, but there is certainly more feedback to get. Does anyone have any specific objection to, asking the staff to start this process and/or expending the $20,000 or so that were estimated? Seeing a lot of shaking heads.
Okay, we will, what we'll do is we'll try and get something a little more fleshed out, and I will share it through email once we have a more fleshed out path forward.
Sure. And I don't know if we have to go back to the board to address funding. I don't know.
We do not, the board authorized expending the funds for the work on the senior center, and so that authorization, we believe, is still viable.
Good, thank you.
I guess a clarification question.
Yeah.
Can this assessment be done such that it doesn't need to have two paths going on, one for a senior center only and one for the combined? If we kind of live with the idea that the combined facility is potentially feasible, senior center first?
Yeah, so I think the needs assessment, at least, especially at the beginning, is just gonna be what do we need in general?
Okay,
It's gonna stay at the 9,500 foot level.
yeah,
And at some point, we'll make the decision of whether or not we want to, propose conceptual design for A and B or just combined.
okay,
I don't think we need to make that decision quite yet.
okay.
Edward.
For the needs assessment, a suggestion in terms of the stakeholders who are going to inform the needs assessment, I would recommend that, I know the seniors that are actually engaging and using the senior center, that they're one data point. Because you also have the data of seniors who may or may not use the senior center that could outweigh those that are actually actively involved in members. Of course, we want to bring more members in, but those members are actively using it and see the value. I think that needs to be one data point, and then maybe all seniors being another data point to balance those two, because there may be reasons, seniors may have other, may go to the Y, they may have other, church groups, they may have other, so to provide that balance. And then certainly the community center side, I'd want to make sure that we're engaging with, the stakeholders around our schools and across the community to see what their needs may be. I know they often reach out with their wish list of what they wish the schools had that don't have, so I don't want to miss that opportunity either.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's part of why we're so happy that you all are here.
Yeah.
Is that, you have access to a lot of that information that I think we didn't have the first time around. And so that'll be very helpful, I'm sure.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? All right, we'll move on then to the meaty topic of the night, which is the site location analysis that was provided by Interim Manager Schmidt and Deputy Township Manager Opsimer.
So I'm going to turn this over to Deputy Manager Opsimer in just a second. I just want to touch base on the Nakoma Center because as we divvied up tasks, that was myself and Director Wazinski met with current leadership in the Nakoma Center. And what you see in your packet is the actual land lease. We found the old document. We mapped it out. They do have a land lease over all of the space on page 20 of your packet. They do have plans to start capital campaign in the next year to 18 months to begin expansion of the facility with a northern wing and a southern wing. I would also point out that southern wing will probably involve us having to renegotiate the lease given the layout. So I can say fairly unequivocally at this point that the Nakoma site is not a very viable site. There are enough moving parts here that it pushes it out beyond, I think, the viability of the decision process here. So now that I've said that, since I was in the meeting, I'm going to turn the rest over to Deputy Manager Opsimer, who did the lion's share of the work on this.
Thank you.
Thank you, Manager Schmidt, and good evening, task force members. I'm actually going to go out of order this evening. Based on the discussion, I'm going to go through the sites that would be senior center only sites where our acreage is insufficient for a joint center, and then I'll go through the sites that would have more flexibility. So I'll start then with the Meridian Township Municipal Complex on page 19 of your packet. So obviously that is this campus, and there were two sites, one of which Manager Schmidt just touched on, which is the Nokomis site over here. And the other site that we had initially explored were the recreation fields right here to the west of the Central Park Pavilion. So a couple of considerations with this site. We have about just under 2 acres of buildable land there to the west of the Central Park Pavilion. We would have underground utility needs. We have a lift station that currently serves the bathrooms for the pavilion, the historical village, and the buildings in the historical village and the Nokomis Center. It's a 2-inch force main with a lift station there immediately west of the pavilion, so we would have to either bring in a new service off Central Park Drive for sanitary, or we would have to replace that existing 2-inch force main. So there are some utility considerations here. We haven't delineated the wetlands here that are to the west of the sports field, so that would have to be investigated further. All of this would kind of, constrain our buildable footprint to the point where we could really only support a senior center on this site. But the township does own the land, so on the upside, we don't have land acquisition on this site. But those are mostly the pros and cons of the sports recreation fields. Probably the biggest issue with this site is finding the space to offset the sports recreation facilities. which kind of gets back to the whole problem that we're having, right? Land is finite, and we're really bumping up against our ceiling with land in this township.
Member Hood, you have a comment?
Would this site accommodate parking for the senior center in addition to parking the township already offers?
That's kind of why we've said only a senior center here, because we would have to park the new facility. We are at capacity. When we have 55 and up exercise activities in the morning, I sometimes struggle to find a parking space for work. We do fill up the main parking lot when we have certain events at Central Park Pavilion during the 8 to 5 workday.
Okay.
So we would have to fully park it in that red box in addition to constructing an approximately 10,000 square foot footprint, right?
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Any other questions on this initial site here in the municipal complex?
I just want to quickly support that constraint on parking. Just as of this Monday, I think they had the 55 and above fitness. We had the garden club. There was other things finding there was not a parking spot to be had. So it is very tight.
Yep.
You've experienced that for youth soccer on the weekends as well.
Exactly. Yeah. Even
It's
sporties
tough.
for shorties.
And I do know the need at our current site at Chippewa, we don't have enough parking or parking in proximity for our seniors. So there's a need for additional parking that we don't currently have that I'd like the new site to be able to consider.
Good point.
Terrific. Thank you.
Manager Schmidt covered most of the, what we kind of call the Nokomis site within the township's municipal complex. The underlying land is owned by the township, but there is a 99-year lease. There is a annual opt-out clause in that lease. So either party could terminate the lease, but obviously the township would not want to displace the center, so that complicates it. Conceivably, it's possible, we haven't explored this at all, but conceivably it's possible that we could talk to the Nokomis Center about possibly reducing their footprint, and given their desire to build an addition, we could possibly do a land swap where they possibly come further to the south and we acquire the eastern portion. But once again, that would be a senior center only site given the land constraints. It probably would bypass some of the utility conflicts or utility needs that we would have with the sports fields. Just because here we could bring in a new sewer lateral and a new water service line off of Marsh Road. But again, we're pretty constrained there, and the biggest problem there would be the timeline to negotiate with the other party in the lease as it relates to the timeline that we're under for the state of Michigan grant.
So have we, in the discussions with Nokomis, did we discuss at all incorporating slightly like if we were to build a senior center on this property, acknowledging that it could only be just a senior center on this property, was there any discussion about incorporating them, even with a slightly larger footprint, into that in any way?
Not during this task force, but perhaps during the first task force, and I would look to Manager Schmidt to see if he has any knowledge on.
I ask because if they're looking for, let's just say 5,000 square feet, and we can build a building that's 15,000 square feet, give them 5, keep 10 for the senior center, we might be able to, save them the capital campaign of having to go out and do that, and they might be amenable to being a part of that center.
Are you thinking they're building an addition on their existing facility, or building one facility that houses a senior center and a Nokomis center?
Well, I'm not going to play architect or designer here, but I would imagine you could find a way to build a 15,000 square foot building, cordon off whatever they're looking for square footage wise, and get both. I'm just curious if that was ever broached with them.
It was not, and that's something that we could have a conversation with them about. If we're building one new facility that houses both, I think one constraint is, I didn't run a calculation on how many square feet they have. I know I did a while back, but I don't have it off the top of my head. But they have more than 5,000 square feet, so we're probably looking at, they're probably going to want 10 or a little bit over 10. And then we got the senior center that wants 10,000 square feet. And so then we're probably looking at double the cost of constructing a senior-only center.
Sure.
So that's one consideration, is we'd probably be looking at a larger price tag than we otherwise would.
Yeah, okay.
How would parking be handled in that location?
So the current lot is vacant much of the time, and we would probably look at expanding it here. And then for handicap, conceptually, what you would do is you'd bring a service drive in here, and you'd have handicap parking up front. Very similar to the existing senior center at Chippewa Middle School.
Right.
You'd have a turnaround drive up near the building with handicap parking, but the main non-handicap parking would have to be back here.
So removing some of the green space then from the historic village?
Yes, yeah, we'd be losing some green space there. We'd have to do a parking needs assessment. We'd have to really kind of study, but there's not a lot of parking that occurs on the existing parking lot. So conceivably, you wouldn't have to necessarily double the parking.
Okay. Member McNosy, you had your hand up a moment ago?
She asked my question.
Okay, terrific. All right, thank you.
And the township, of course, does own this land, and it's not under the lease. So the parking would be outside of the lease constraints. Skipping over Ward Cliff, we'll come back to that when we get to the senior and community center sites. Okay, so 5280 Okemos Road. This is located at the northeast corner of Okemos Road and Gaylord C. Smith Court, immediately south of the CN Railroad crossing on Okemos Road. This site was initially acquired by the township to construct a trailhead for the MSU to Lake Lansing Trail and for park facilities, outdoor park and recreation facilities. It was brought to our attention today by members of the Park Commission, and this is my oversight, and not looking at this site a little bit closer, I did know that we had a trust fund grant that was the part of the purchasing of this property. We did talk to the DNR. The site isn't off the table. What we would have to do to utilize the site is we would have to mitigate based on the footprint of the ineligible portions of the building that we construct. So, for instance, we might be able to count, if we construct the trailhead with a senior center, for instance, we might be able to count the trailhead as part of a building that would not need to be mitigated. And the mitigation would actually be based on market value, not based on acreage. Parking was a question mark. They're going to get back to us on how the parking would work. But conceivably, we would also use the parking lot for trailhead parking. A lot of people do need to drive to the MSU to Lake Lansing Trail to utilize it. Part of our plan was to have trailhead parking here before the site kind of started to be explored for this purpose. 1.7 acre site. Train noises, we suspected might be one of the concerns that the task force would have. The township does actually have a fairly robust plan to turn this railroad into a quiet zone from Haggerin Road to Green Road. But we would need some capital costs to do that, a little bit under $1 million, about $800,000 to $900,000 in total to create a quiet zone. So it is conceivable that the train noises could be mitigated through a quiet zone. The site has direct access to water and sanitary sewer. You could certainly park and construct a senior center on this site, and the township owns the land. But we would probably have to find approximately, well, acreage would be to be determined based on market value, but we're probably looking at having to acquire an acre approximately somewhere to mitigate the loss from the trust fund.
Member McNosy.
Regarding the CN Railroad, just from my other hobby, CN is notorious in backing out of agreements or adding extra conditions on them. Okay. To the point of forcing Amtrak to run multiple empty cars for axle count. I'm not sure, the city of Battle Creek once had a quiet zone near the station there. In my most recent trips there, I hear horns. So I wouldn't say, they wouldn't be the first organization I'd want to depend on.
That is a good warning, and I kind of tried to temper the language in my memorandum as it related to the quiet zone. So interestingly enough, we did hire OHM to help us with our initial investigation on the quiet zone.
Yeah.
The engineer who was working with us was on staff at Battle Creek, Battle Creek, when they implemented their quiet zone. So that's why we went with OHM on that.
It might be interesting to see if he has if they have any updates. But the other thing is, I first thought about it, I said, well, there's a railroad track near Chippewa too. The issue is the frequency of trains is much higher on the CN tracks.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, it's one of those things where we would not find out definitively 100% if the quiet zone is a go or the true cost until after the senior center is probably constructed, just because the quiet zone comes with a lot of bureaucracy and red tape, whereas constructing a building simply doesn't.
Okay.
So there would be that one caveat that something could go wrong, but it's more likely that it would be unanticipated costs that have to be accounted for. But the main items that we would need would be the constant warning time, circuitry at 3 crossings.
Okay.
I'll just briefly note that 1410 Grand River Avenue, wrong site. Sorry.
This is the driving range?
Yeah, that's not the site that I wanted to mention.
Is it 1492 Grand River?
1492 Grand River is coming off the market, so that, Manager Schmidt found that right as we were finalizing the memorandum. So you can take that off your list as that is coming off the market.
That's the one at the bottom of page 7 on what page numbers that are on hard copy.
Yep. So that pretty much concludes the site. So it's really, 5280 is your most viable site for constructing a senior-only center.
Okay. And you've got joint options for us.
Yep, and so now we will walk through the joint site options, starting with the Meridian Township Central Fire Station site. And so this, while the address is on Okemos Road, if we did construct a center on this site, it would front on Central Park Drive, given the configuration of the parcel. This is the most flexible site that doesn't require land acquisition, just because it has the most acreage. We've got about 10 acres of upland to work with. We could conceivably have curb cuts on Okemos Road, Central Park Drive, and one to the Mall Service Drive, which would probably be required if we desired to have the CATA routes come into the campus and serve the site right at the front door. We already started exploring that with CATA. It seems viable as long as we make a connection point, which would have to be somewhere right in here where we have upland. And then one of the benefits, for this site that doesn't really apply to any of the other sites would just be how homogeneous it is with all of the existing township facilities on Central Park Drive. So with the new signage, it's pretty readily apparent when you drive it. You got the Central Fire Station, you have Central Park South, Marketplace, et cetera. And then also it could be included, if we construct the center here, it could serve in some capacity for Celebrate Meridian, our Pride Festival, and any other community events that are hosted at the marketplace. And one other benefit of this site, and I was not able to confirm this 100%, but I believe that a 6-inch water main was stubbed to this site when it was conceptually being looked at for a library for Meridian Township. So we do have a water main that's already stubbed under Central Park Drive and goes into this site, which could be extended into the campus.
Question?
Yep, Member Robertson.
We talked about the train for the previous spot and how it might impact from the sound perspective. My own ignorance here, what's the sound like from the fire station being right there?
Not substantial. I'd have to double check with the fire chief on exactly when they leave with their sirens on, but it's not every instance. Because they are able to stop traffic with the signal in front. Because that came up during the rezoning and all of the various approvals for the construction of the central fire station. So it's not as if they leave that site with their sirens on at all times. So I don't think noise would really be an issue on the site.
Okay, thank you.
Are there any other questions on that site? All right, thank you. Member Vagnozzi.
Any mitigation issues for the removing all those mature trees?
We wouldn't have to mitigate or offset that. We certainly could if that was a desire. That could be included in the bond, and we have a plethora of land preserves that could use reforesting. So if there was a policy intent, that's something that we could certainly build into the bond, and we could, whether it's a 2-to-1 or a 1-to-1, we could look to compensate these. That would probably be desired over what took place with the central fire station. Some of those trees have since been taken down. A lot of effort was made to save trees, but then we had pavement that encroached into the drip edge of the tree, and then we lost trees. And we've also had complaints, we've had employees who've had vehicles damaged from fallen limbs, things of that nature. So it probably would be better from a policy standpoint just to compensate or mitigate for the tree loss on a different site. I think that would be an exceptional idea.
And just a quick follow-up. How would that fact that it's so heavily wooded affect construction cost? Significant?
Oh, the tree removals?
Yeah.
I could get you some numbers because we have a standing tree contract at all times. So I could get you some numbers, but it wouldn't be that substantive.
Okay.
It would easily come in, we're talking 5 figures versus, 7 figures for land acquisition, right?
Okay, I just.
We're talking tens of thousands, not even 6 figures.
Okay.
And that site is it 10 acres in totality?
Yes, well, I just measured the upland. That's how much upland you have
Okay.
roughly.
Got it.
Yep.
And is that wooded, or is there a part in there that's already kind of cleared?
A good portion of it is wooded. Let's use Google Earth just because that has the most current satellite imagery. So this is actually, if you're wondering what this is, this was the compensating cut for.
No, that's the basin.
Or that's the basin.
Cuts that one.
Yep, this is the compensating cut from the fill material for raising Grand River Avenue.
Got it. That's what I was
So
thinking.
roughly speaking, we'd be looking at building in this footprint. So this would be your buildable footprint right here.
Interesting.
The wetland does encroach into here.
And just to follow up on the wetland question, when we originally looked at this site, and we've mentioned this before, but for those of you that aren't aware of this, we did do a wetland delineation for the northern, call it 15 acres. Because we kind of know there's a line at which it's wet south of that. There are limited small wetlands, one of which probably doesn't even qualify, one of which we'd probably mitigate, but it's still under. There was less than a half acre of wetlands in this area, and I believe 3 little pockets. So it is a viable site from a wetland perspective, staying north of the compensating cut.
That on the Google Maps page, you showed like the ground cleared for Grand River that they were using. Is that we would operate around that theoretically if we chose that space? We wouldn't be able to use that space.
Correct.
Thank you.
Other questions on this site? All right, thank you.
And the next site that would work for a joint center would be the former Jonker store, which has obviously been discussed in great detail. This is the only site on your list that has an existing building. Due to the square footage of the existing structure, which is currently 95,000 square feet, this would have to be a senior and community center. Obviously, this site has received the most thorough vetting of any site. The township's architectural firm did put together renderings on how you would renovate the structure and retrofit in a senior and community center that would partially be taking out a portion of the second floor above, well, where the footprint of the gymnasium would be located. And also the parking would predominantly be south of the actual footprint of the site. And so we would probably want to locate the senior center on the south portion. And so once you work around the existing elevator shafts and where the senior center needs to go, and then where that bumps the gymnasium to, you aren't left with a great deal of flexibility. The floor plans are attached to your cover memorandum. But I would just caution that there's not a lot that you can do in the way of reconfiguring that floor plan. You could move like the exercise rooms around, and you could move the shared spaces like the auditorium around to some extent, but there's limited flexibility on the floor plan for this site. This site is on CATA routes 1, 22, 23, and 48. I kind of forgot to go over the CATA routes for the other sites. Just briefly going through the senior center only sites. That is one of the cons that I listed for 5280 Okemos Road. It's highly unlikely that we would get that onto an existing CATA route. For the other two, well, for the Nokomis one, that obviously is on an existing CATA route, albeit you'd have to walk across the municipal campus. Questions?
So I'll start with one question. Did we ever, so obviously this space is bigger than we anticipated needing, at least at the outset, and that the operational costs of maintaining that level of space was way more expensive than the board seemed interested in. Was there ever any discussion about demoing the building and putting up a facility that was the adequate size that we were looking for? Or was it always just, let's use the space that's being provided?
In a roundabout way, we actually did have that conversation because about the same time as we started this, there was the discussion of whether or not JCPenney's was going to extend their lease. And so we did have a demo conversation about what it would take to demo an anchor in the mall and what you would have to do to then, so malls are their own beast under the building code. They're essentially 5 buildings. Each of the anchors are their own building and then the main building, and there's interaction. How those buildings interact is very specifically laid out in the building code. We would probably have to reattach to the mall to make it work. Sure. So you're well into 7 figures for demo because you're essentially detaching and then you have to reattach. And so as we were talking about this with relation to JCPenney, it was clearly not a viable option to reattach. And so the thought at that time was they were going to tear it down. There was thinking about some apartment buildings there and how you lay them out to get the separation. We then started going down this road with Yonkers, and we very quickly realized it's essentially the same thing. You're going to be well into 7 figures to tear it down, and then you got to reattach all your systems back to the existing building. So it's not a very viable option.
Okay, thank you.
Good question.
Yeah, good question.
I just wanted to confirm, we would hold control of that property based on a long-term lease.
No, actually, we were pursuing a purchase, and we had negotiated with the property owner
And that
for
is
a
an
purchase
option?
price. Yes.
Oh.
Yeah. Well, it was. We'd have to revisit that now. That could have changed because the market could have changed, but at that time, we were in discussions with the current owner.
Neighborhood.
Does what's in the packet change what the proposal was from the last task force? Like, is this viable in terms of affordability? My understanding was the township had concerns about affording this option in the past. So is this in play or is it not in play?
It's really a policy-making decision. We would kind of defer to the board. It wasn't, we're levying a lot more for roads than we were discussing levying for this facility. This would be about 1.3 to 1.4 mils if you're funding it 100% construction and operations for 20 years. If you find some, additional sources of funding, it could get down to 1.2 mils. You're not talking about an extraordinarily high millage rate to construct and operate this site.
That
It
did
all
seem to be
depends on
the,
that appetite.
yeah, that did seem to be the prevailing reason not to move forward with it, was the size of the millage that came out of it and the length of time.
Thank you.
Spent on it.
Thank you.
Never back noted.
You can punt on this. Comparison to the fire station site. Is there any way, shape, or form that there's a cost advantage to the township to go back and pursue Yonkers? Let me clarify. Could you build standalone on the fire station site for less money? And you can defer?
So just to clarify, you're asking, is it possible to build a standalone senior center?
No, I'm asking for the combined.
I'm sorry, okay.
Because this is what this proposal is.
Got
I want to do apples
Is
to
it possible to
apples.
build a combined senior community center on the fire station lot for less than?
I'm trying to understand if there's any
It kind of depends.
any advantage versus being able to essentially customize.
Kind of depends if you're looking short-term or long-term. On the short term, I just ran some rough math, and at $750 a square foot, at 45,000 square feet,
Right.
you might be looking at, 30 to 35 million for a new center. We had, our final construction estimate for Yonkers was 25 million, and you had, add in, well, we had acquisition in that. We had our acquisition in that 25 million, so that kind of shows you that, yes, when you renovate an existing shell, you can get really good bang for your buck.
Okay.
But the downside would be, if
The
we build,
compromises you have to make.
Limiting floor plan.
well, if we build our own center, we can put a flat roof on it, we can put a metal roof and a pitched roof, and so we wouldn't have to touch the roof for 100 years, whereas with Yonkers, we're gonna have to put, 20 years from now, it's gonna need a $2 million roof.
Okay.
And at the initial renovation, it was gonna need a $1 million roof.
Got it.
But every 20 years, we were gonna have to put a new roof on it. So there's certain things, it also had elevator shafts, and we would perhaps not need an elevator shaft.
If you were a single floor building.
Correct, and it had 2 elevator shafts, so there's a lot that goes into just the annual upkeep and the inspections for those. Township only has 2, so that would have doubled the number of elevator shafts that we would have.
Interesting.
It's very much a short-term, long-term question.
Okay.
To Dan's point, short-term, sure, new construction is always more expensive.
Okay.
Long-term, sure, new construction is always better.
Okay.
Okay.
A quick comment, because I love the idea of using a building in the community and the access and the parking. But the other side to that for me is because it's so large, it appears beyond our needs that we would be wanting to keep building and building. That comes with operational costs, that comes with additional staffing costs, and that would be the downside for me of the reuse.
Yep. And one thing that we were discussing towards the end of that is there was only 3 or 4 offices in the floor plan, and we probably would need more office space than what we had in the final floor plan. So we would need to revisit that, but there's a dearth of space that could be finished. So there's no spatial issue there. We would just have to finish a little bit more space to have adequate office space.
Sometimes I found this so in buildings, like for our church, for example, when we did that, if there's empty space, people want to fill it. And then that comes with costs that they don't anticipate. And sometimes it becomes just a junk room, and that's a very expensive junk room. So that's just my caution on an extra large building, maybe beyond what we feel our needs might be.
Yep.
Robertson?
The Yonkers space too, I mean, when you're talking about having that space owned by the township, but still attached to the mall, what kind of restrictions or liabilities or issues are there that attach to that as well? I mean, it seems like they could be pretty cumbersome.
part of it was the association, basically think of an HOA fee, but on the commercial side, right? So there was a commercial HOA fee, and it was, Tim, do you remember if that was 5,000 a year? What was the commercial?
5,000 a month?
5,000 a month, yeah.
Fees?
Yeah.
And that gets to the problem with leasing, which is covered at the beginning of the memorandum. So we were going to have to pay them all. We were going to try to negotiate it.
Right.
But our negotiating, at that point,
Yeah,
we don't have a lot of negotiating room.
Right.
yeah, your games are played, yeah.
In that is snow removal and parking lot maintenance. And so then it becomes a trade-off of, do we just want to give them $5,000 a month and live with whatever
Yep, their destiny.
the conditions are? And then when our residents complain about trip hazards on the sidewalk or the potholes in the parking lot, we're just kind of left to, try our best to encourage the landlord to take care of those things, which always becomes kind of a sticking point. And so that's where you get into the cost and also that problematic relationship. And so what we were going to do is try to negotiate that as far down as we could and just take over. We would do pretty much everything, all the big items under that. We would provide our own security, we would provide our own snow removal, we would maintain the parking lot, et cetera.
Got it. What type of a scenario, I'm thinking, what's the new thing in 20 years from now? Malls hopefully are still around to some extent, but what's the new thing in 20 years? And does that implicate, like BJ's Wholesale or Sam's Club wants to buy that property, or Amazon wants to put a distribution site there? Maybe something a little bit cooler than that, hopefully, for our community, but are we then now attached to something that we're like, whoa, that wasn't what we intended?
Correct. We would, beyond our legal rights to oversee certain types of development, we would have no control over who our neighbor is.
Yeah.
And our legal rights are not to dictate who our neighbor is.
Right.
So that would be a complicating factor, and it could also, there could be an awkward period where you have, blight immediately adjacent. That's certainly a reality that could be encountered at some point.
Thank you.
All right, seeing no other questions, we'll move on to the next viable site.
Wardcliff Elementary, Mr. Hood and our partners at Okemos Schools. So former elementary school, which the school building is still on the site. Okemos Public Schools still owns it. It is centrally located north to south, but it is not located centrally east to west. It's on the western edge of the township. This site would be very flexible. The one thing that we have to keep in mind is there are 4 recreation fields that we would want to avoid building on, so we don't have to mitigate or find compensating facilities. But we do have plenty of upland here to build on. So space would not be an issue. I didn't look into the water and sewer, but if the water and sewer that served the school building would be sufficient to serve whatever center we would construct. While it's not on a CATA route, this actually does have some of the best access because you're a quarter-mile walk from Route 1, which is the only CATA route that has what most transit riders would call a good frequency. The bus comes every 10 minutes approximately. So it does have access to routes 1 and 48 on Grand River Avenue. And obviously a community partner owns it. So all things considered, it checks a lot of the boxes, perhaps with the lone exception of centrally located.
Well, I guess we'll leave it to Mr. Hood to tell us whether that's even a viable option at all.
Yeah, so first thing to say is I don't speak for the school board on this matter, but I could tell you what my recommendation would be in regards to this site. So with the growth we have around Bennett Woods School and on this side of the township, we really want to keep that site for a potential school in the future. We're looking at evaluating our Montessori program that's currently at Central Elementary. This has been talked about as a possible site if we choose to, that building's aging. We could certainly rebuild on that current site, but we could also look at a potential Wardcliff site for a new build of a school in the future. We need to get more students away from Bennett Woods because that is getting rather crowded already. And this quadrant allows us to kind of pull some of those developments that are now going in around Bennett Woods and north of Bennett Woods, kind of north, because Bennett Woods is going to be overcrowded soon with that new subdivision going in. So my recommendation to the board would be not to engage with the senior center on this site, because the school district's needs would outweigh that.
All right, well, that puts a pretty definitive pin in that one.
Yes.
All right, on we go then.
All right. 1410 Grand River Avenue. So this is currently being used as a driving range. It is centrally located north to south, and it's centrally located east to west if you ignore the population centers, but it is right on the eastern edge of the developed portion of the township, right? So it's not really centrally located where the population center is. This would be the most flexible site just due to the sheer acreage. It's 21 acres. There is a wetland in the northeast corner. It is possible, just based on other developments that have come before the township for the site, it's possible that MDOT would require a deceleration lane for the westbound traffic on Grand River Avenue. So we might have to make some improvements on Grand River Avenue to build on this site. It's on Cata Route 48. Which is not a high-frequency route, so bus access and transit access is the predominant issue with all of these sites that are kind of on the eastern development boundary. We can certainly discuss the site with CATA, but the problem is going to be that this site and any site near it is going to have a significant impact on their route frequency. They'd have to add a lot of buses to keep their frequency impact at a minimum, meaning the amount of time between buses arriving. So that's going to be our biggest challenge on a site like this.
Member Vignosi.
I'll be real careful about how I ask this, since I am been recently appointed to the CATA board. I know that being on a CATA route is one of the criteria that's in all of these. Take my CATA hat off. Are we at risk of overstating the number of people I don't want to use that word, that were limiting their access, given that we have Ready Ride?
Mm-hmm. How many people would be impacted by not being on a CATA line?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'm not sure I want to rule a site out that ticks all the other boxes. Mm-hmm. Okay. I mean, I think for those of you that aren't familiar, the routes that are throughout this document, Route 1 is Meridian Mall to downtown Lansing. Okay, highest frequency route in the system. Okay. So if we find a site on that route, you're not going to find better service anywhere else. Routes 22 and 23 are the Okemos routes that go to MSU. They kind of are the opposites of each other. One runs clockwise, one runs counterclockwise. Okay. Those routes would probably be easier to be adjusted for us to negotiate with CATA. And then Route 48, I think the frequency is so low that it really offers very little benefit. Okay, because it's primarily a feeder for the eastern end of the county. Yay.
Member Maisner.
Yeah, I just feel that being on a CATA bus route was one of our criteria, but it certainly was not a primary criteria for this.
Okay.
Thank you.
If we find a perfect site that meets everything else, I don't think we should easily get rid of it, given that we're only looking at a couple of small.
We would have the option of discussing with CATA tweaks to Ruddy Ride, that would, if we needed,
Good service to it.
if we needed more capacity, if we find that. Okay. I think it's important for people to, I don't want to understate, okay? CATA happens to have a millage on the ballot.
We do.
Yeah, but I looked up, they had over 7 million riders, okay, in the metropolitan Lansing area. That's quite significant. And I saw the projections for 2024, and it's going to exceed 8 million. Okay. But, yeah, so, but I don't, I would like to look at a way, if we find the perfect site, and I'd like to work on mitigating the lack of the current lack of CATA service to the location, rather than rule it out.
Thank you. What's the status of the small parcel that is sort of a tooth into this larger parcel on the map there?
This right here?
Nope, the one on the southern edge.
It says 1410.
That's the actual driving range building. For whatever reason, it's parceled off separately.
But they are being sold together.
Yes.
Yes, yep.
Is there, it seems as though this parcel is good for being able to fit both a, senior and community center combined on it. It seems much larger than we would ever need in terms of use for those facilities. First of all, it's buildable except for that upper northeast corner, correct? That's wetland?
Correct.
So that's all upland area we could build on.
Yep.
Are there other uses for it that we could explore for the additional acreage that might either mitigate our cost or allow us to adequately use that space so that we're not wasting it? The area that's to the east, the stub that's off to the west there, is basically forested, is it not?
Yes.
So that's an interesting notion because it's, to me, that might be an interesting candidate for preservation down the line. The area that is currently being used for the pad of the driving range, we're currently, the board is, through the Parks Department, looking at an assessment of, is there space for a cricket field, right? We know that there's a need for baseball diamonds and, soccer fields and whatnot. I presume that we could look at those for that back area as well. That could be an interesting park facility to add to. Would you say that's a fair assessment?
Yeah, and it's relatively flat, which I'm no expert on cricket. I defer to Director Wazinski on that, but I'm going to guess that you want flat land. So from a sports recreation standpoint, the land would be pretty good to start with.
Yeah. I'd be interested to find out, I know that, some of our residents, our partners are all seeking additional land for some of these activities. I know that Okemos is losing a number of fields as they're expanding their rebuilding their facilities. It's an interesting opportunity for potential partnership down the road.
And there's,
and I mentioned land preservation because there's been a lot of discussion about, whether to preserve more or not. There's a very healthy fund balance for acquisition in there. If we, through this process, discover an interesting parcel that could be subdivided for land preservation, and some, portion of the purchase price of that property could be used from the land preservation fund to preserve land, which is, of course, its mission, that might be an interesting notion to talk to the Land Preservation Board about.
yeah, and this is the current satellite imagery, so you can see that kind of that western sliver of the site is roughly right here.
Mm-hmm. Anyway, those are some initial thoughts. Member Bagnosi.
It would seem to me that, repurposing a driving range for other recreation, or at least a portion of it for other recreational usage would be a good solution to our shortage of sports fields. I mean, a good potential solution.
Provides us some nice flexibility, both with potential funding.
I'm sorry, I should be looking over at our.
You should, because we're not talking
I'm sorry.
We get in there sooner.
I'm so sorry.
No, it's just, yes, I agree. From the Park Commission standpoint, like the option to have flexibility there. We are losing fields. That's a common problem at every meeting that we have, and this would provide some opportunity there.
Thank you. I'll try to swivel a little bit more. Great, amazing.
Yeah, I'm probably most excited about this site, just because it's large enough. We're not clearing trees. It's a wide open space, centrally located. It's large enough to build whatever we need to build for the senior center, community center, but then also there's additional township resources that could go toward maybe the help with the acquisition costs, mainly the park millage and maybe a little land preservation as well, for just even green space for all sorts of athletic fields, whether it's soccer season, lacrosse, cricket. There's a need. The Parks and Recreation Department's hands are pretty tied on what's available, and we are partners with the schools and utilizing their facilities as well. And they don't really have enough. This would really help get this project moving forward, but also fill a definite gap in facility availability in our community.
And for the schools, potentially.
And for the schools, too.
Perfect. Any other thoughts or discussion on this parcel before we step away and look at any final? Member Bagnosi.
Just an observation for the public. It says this site is 20, for just global purposes, it's 20 acres. It's by far the largest site we're looking at.
Yep.
We are not going to run out of land on this site.
You'd be surprised how many acres you need for cricket.
But that is not,
Yes.
our charge is not 20-acre cricket fields.
Ours is, though.
Then use your money.
Just your colors.
Well, that's what we're talking about.
Sure, and then one other thing to go along with this would also provide an opportunity for some outdoor facility space for the community and senior center, whether it's, basketball courts or pickleball courts, something like that. So there could be some outdoor recreation right at that site versus some of the other places like at Yonkers. It's parking lot all around us. You're just going inside, and that's basically what you're going to get is what's inside.
Thank you.
Just one other thing that I'll point out to the task force, just in terms of this area is obviously right on that eastern boundary of development. And that boundary is probably not going to shift dramatically, but infill in this area is going to change over time. And just one other thing to keep in mind, Okemos Schools owns this parcel immediately north of the new Silverstone Estates neighborhood. So there could come a day when there is another school in this area, or these could be additional recreation fields. But, this is going to be an area that transforms a considerable amount. You're going to see that with the additional sites. And I've got one site that's about half the acreage. Why don't we skip over Central Park Drive for just a moment, and we'll go to 1492 Grand River. Wait, that's the one that we're scrapping. 1510 West Grand River Avenue. So this is at the northwest corner of Grand River Avenue and Powell Road. This is Powell Road right here. If you recall, LaFontaine had proposed to build a auto dealership on this site. Pandemic happened, things changed. The site was clear cut. So this is from the listing, so that's old satellite imagery. To look at the site today.
That's it right there.
Right
here.
Yeah, right here. So this is what the site looks like today. If I recall, just a little under 9 acres. So here you've got about 48% of the acreage of the prior site. So you would have acreage in excess of what you would need for a center, but not the additional 10 acres or 11 acres on top of that. So you could have some sports recreation sites on this site. This site's pretty much identical in every other way. It's listed for 2.25 million currently versus the other site was listed.
4.5, right?
Yep. So a little bit cheaper, but less acreage on the list price. But otherwise, it's very comparable to the other site in just about every way.
Is that
Member Vagnozzi.
across the street from,
It's
Tom's?
cooperative, yep.
Okay,
Here's our GIS map, so here's
Yeah.
Walden Pond.
right,
Right here.
okay. I see.
This is the site, I'll
Yeah.
keep it highlighted.
Yeah, that's fine. Okay,
Is that wetland there on the eastern half?
Correct, wooded wetland predominantly, you can see the kind of wooded forested area right there, and then it kind of extends out a little bit on the south and west side. So, should tell me the acreage.
Well, it appears to be about 30 to 40%
yeah.
Yeah,
of the parcel.
the mouse is glitching like crazy, so it doesn't want to click on anything.
Not to worry.
right now. But yes, we do have a wetland that constrains this site a little bit more, but predominantly upland that you could build on.
Thank you. Any questions or comments on this site? I'm gonna look over here first. Okay. All right, very good. I think there's one more in the packet to consider that we haven't already ruled out for various reasons.
Yep, so I'm gonna go to the GIS map to start on this, if it'll let me.
Yeah, actually, if we could, let's take a quick 3-4 minute recess. I also need to go to the restroom and fill my water bottle, so we'll be back here at 7:40, please.
It's not a board meeting week, so I'm in charge of dinner. So.
Oh, no.
That's how that works.
All right, let's,
Oh, no, wasn't very promising for your dinner plate.
we're almost there. We're on the second to last.
Okay.
We'll call us back to order at 7:42.
Parts of it are hard to watch.
And we'll turn things back over to Mr. Opsimer for the final site location.
Thank you for the break.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so our final site does not have an address as it's undeveloped, but it would be this parcel located right here between Belvedere and
Oh, it's across from
Columbus. Yep.
Across from
On
Coles.
Central Park Drive. So just to zoom out, to give you some point of reference, this is Target, this is Kohl's, Central Park Drive, and here's Newman Road, and here's the Home Depot. So this site, you do have a single-family residential neighborhood to the east. So when we looked at this site, we were kind of anticipating like a buffer zone in here. And so you would have enough acreage if you maintained roughly this landmass east of my cursor as a buffer zone. You would have enough upland there to build a joint center. Going back to my memo,
Is this parcel for sale?
this parcel is not listed on the market, but we do know that the current owner is entertaining offers to some extent. We do anticipate that this site would be pretty expensive to acquire. We don't have a number to give you, but it would probably exceed the driving range in cost, at least by a small amount. So per acre, this would come at a substantially higher cost in all likelihood. And we wouldn't get the benefits that the task force was recently talking about in terms of that additional acreage for like the driving range site or the LaFontaine site. It's not on a CATA bus route. Well, actually, I correct that. It is on Route 48, but it's not on a high-frequency route.
Yeah.
This site is kind of in that middle area. It's certainly a lot more viable to get onto Route 22 or 23. I don't think CATA would really entertain extending Route 1, just because I think they're going to be pretty protective of the frequency on Route 1. But I think 22 or 23 might be viable to add to Central Park Drive.
Because they're using Dobie Road,
Yes,
and so it might just be rerouting how they get to the mall.
yes. Currently, Times Square Drive, difficult thing with CATA's map.
See, that's
Right
Central
here.
Park.
Yeah, it's right here, so the problem is that routes 22 and 23 currently go down Times Square Drive where Culver's is, and where Walmart is.
Yeah.
And then it goes down Central Park Drive. So here's the Central Park Drive intersection, kind of where the MSU FCU is. So you'd almost have to, it'd be kind of awkward to get it onto routes 22 and 23, in so much as you'd have to create some kind of loop with Newman or just take some existing sites off of routes 22 and 23. So
It's a more complicated conversation.
this site is admittedly complicated. Just between, I think the land acquisition would be complicated. I think it would take longer to acquire the land in addition to it being more costly. And CATA route adaptation would be difficult, probably.
Okay. Any other thoughts on this particular parcel? Feels like we're getting less for more comparatively. Well, thank you very much for the presentation, always very thorough. We
Very well done.
appreciate. So I will attempt to recap just the groups so that, we can look at this and decide, do we want to bifurcate our efforts here and explore multiple sites for multiple uses, or do we want to go down just looking at sites that are viable for joint facilities, understanding that we could always build something smaller on there if we wanted to. So the senior center only, we talked about the Central Park Pavilion, the Nokomis, if they're willing to do some kind of a land swap or some kind of a joint operation, and Nancy Moore that's what I'm calling it, the 52, sorry, I don't remember the numbers. but-
5280?
Yep, over by the CN Railroad. That's option 3. And then the joint possible facilities could be at Central Fire Station, at the Yonkers Building, which we've also explored already, the driving range, Powell and Grand River, and this most recent parcel, unnamed, unnumbered parcel at Central Park. Are there any that we want to, strike right away? Methodology-wise, do we want to look at just sites that can accommodate both? Or do we want to look at just, sites for senior center, sites for combined?
It's just based on my listening to the review, the ones that could accommodate a senior center only didn't seem viable to me. When we had options to, even if we chose to do a senior center on one of the larger properties, that it would provide us some flexibility. I didn't necessarily see anything that made me feel strongly about moving in that direction. But.
Okay. Anyone else?
I would just emphasize, I think a double hit, it would be the best from my perspective. If it's doable and based on kind of what you said as well, based on the options that we have, that we explored the latter parts that are joint, they all seem larger, they all seem like they have better kind of accessibility and better use potential. So I would eagerly support that.
Sure. Yeah, personally, I think that exploring sites that can house both saves us down the road if we decide to go with the standalone senior center. It saves us with having the hassle of coming back together, doing this whole process over and attempting to find a site for a community center. If we choose a site that's only for senior centers and is not capable of expanding. So I think from a future-proofing perspective, I would prefer to find a site that could eventually accommodate both, even if it's just one in the short term.
Even to that, if they could, I didn't feel any overwhelming information that made me think that any of those that could accommodate a senior center only were really great sites. I just felt there were more negatives than positives to every one of them.
Ironically, more space is easier in this particular.
Yeah.
Anyone else? Member Hood?
Just to clarify, we're not making the assumption on a combined site that necessarily those has to be one building. It could be two buildings on a site, correct?
Correct.
And we're also not making assumptions that it has to be built, that it couldn't be built in phases.
Correct.
Okay.
It is a site that can accommodate
Yeah.
two facilities or one joined facility, or one phased facility, all of the above. I think, based on my understanding from what was described, the Central Fire Station, the driving range, the Powell site, and the Central Park site could all accommodate any of those scenarios.
Thank you.
Yonkers probably couldn't because it's an existing building and we just get it.
Which Central Park site?
Central Park, that's the unnumbered parcel,
Okay.
the last one we talked about.
Okay, thank you.
So do we feel relatively comfortable then eliminating the 3 senior-only sites that were pitched to us as could only accommodate senior center, I should say?
Correct. I would request that the minutes note which sites.
Yep, so that would be the Nokomis site, the Central Park Pavilion site, and again, that Nancy Moore site that I can't remember the number for. Sorry, I should have looked it up.
Say Nancy Moore's site, that's fine.
5280 Okemos Road.
Okay.
So those are the 3 that we'll eliminate right off the bat, which leaves us with, I think, 5 that were remaining. Do we want to continue to pursue the Yonkers facility at this time, or do we want to look at the other facilities? Member Bagnozzi.
My thoughts are, the Yonkers site, the work that's been done so far on the Yonkers site is actually more complete than what we're tasking township staff to do for these other sites. So given that, I would say I don't see no reason to focus, to spend more effort on the Yonkers site. at this point. If we get to the point where
I see where you're going.
we ruled all the other sites out, then it can come back and play, but it won't need us to go through another analysis on that. It won't delay, and I defer to Tim on whether he concurs or feels otherwise. Do you understand what I'm?
Yeah, no, I think functionally what the position we find ourselves in is the Yonkers site has essentially become the control site in this experiment, because we have the most information about it at this point. We've run it to the ground.
Yeah.
Everything can functionally be compared against that as we move forward.
Yeah.
I don't know that so if this task force told me right now that we should move forward with the Yonkers side, I would say, great, your work is done. We should go back to the board, because we have functionally done that already. We have all that information. So to your point, it can hang out there as, I think the issue that we're going to have, if we circle back to it candidly, is getting it under contract again. But cross that bridge when we come to it.
So we'll put a pin in the Yonkers facility, and we'll circle around once we've explored more fully some of the others.
Yeah, I wouldn't eliminate it yet.
Sure.
But
Very good. Pin,
move forward with some others.
Member Hood.
I really liked the comment about the Yonkers site with we can't control who the neighbors are, and the limit, the elevator shafts and the limiting floor plan. So I'm happy to put a pin in it, but it just didn't feel as opportunistic as some of the other sites that were provided to get what I think the community and seniors may want. So happy to put a pin in it, but that really struck a tone to me. Yeah.
Just to clarify,
There you go.
okay, I think this is in sync with John. I view it as a worst-case fallback site. Don't want to eliminate it, but I see better options. Okay.
Well, in that positive light then, are there any sites we want to specifically, throw our hats in and say, this is the site that we think we'd like to explore moving forward here?
Just a point of clarification, if I may. Are we looking to narrow it down to a couple? Are we hoping to narrow it down to one? What's our hope here for tonight?
Well, I think for the sake of, our decision-making process, I don't know that I think we can narrow it down to one. I don't think we're constrained by any particular plan, but it will help to focus our staff's efforts. We don't want to put feelers out to people about buying land and then string them along for no good reason.
Thank you.
That being the key, that I will point out that if we are interested in going down the road of property acquisition, I would very much recommend that we choose a site, because it is now public knowledge that we are going down this road. And if we have two sites that we are considering for acquisition, we are going to negotiate against ourselves when it comes right down to it, as we're talking to those property owners. So if we are narrowing it, obviously one site would be ideal. If we're narrowing it down to two sites, my strong recommendation would be that it be one site to acquire and one site that we already own.
Okay.
So that we don't run into problems, because we're gonna have to get this under some sort of MOU contract option real quick, like.
Please.
I support the idea of one that's on property the township owns, and one that we would have to acquire.
Okay.
All right.
Is the one that we have to acquire a fallback to Yonkers, or could that
No.
be subbed out?
No.
Would that be a third option then too? We'd have 1-1 and then Yonkers?
I think that if we can do that, that seems like a fine way to go, since, as you've pointed out, we've done this already. I mean, there's only one site on here that we own, right, that's remaining. Right, the central fire station is the only option that we already own.
All right.
And so for that, we find ourselves in a pretty easy position.
Yep.
Mr. Hood?
I would just put out there my thinking. I did like the central fire station option, and then the driving range option. Just, you seem to allow flexibility, may meet additional needs outside our scope. in terms of the need for field space. So those would be the two that I have the most interest in.
Sure. I saw some nodding heads over there. Any
That's a lot
second
of
that.
language. I can go on and on, but I basically would agree with
Yeah.
that.
Those two are my favorite too.
Okay. Yes.
I would, clarification, since we have discussed other uses of the driving range property. I don't want to necessarily tag the full land acquisition cost to this project. We have other potential uses. I don't know if that's something in the analysis that basically, you're gonna come back with with estimated land acquisition cost.
Not at all. If this is the direction of the task force.
Right.
We are going to start implementing and getting that under some sort of contract.
Okay,
And we will continue this process forward with the needs assessment
okay,
based on knowing that we now have two sites that once we've got through the needs assessment, we start doing some conceptual layouts for.
Yeah.
This is just the first step because we needed to get past
right.
we needed to get over the hump of this piece. Now we can start talking about specifics. But staff will work on that behind the scenes, much as what was done with the Anchor site originally.
Yeah.
So what that does is provide us, I guess, what I'm looking at, basically 3 scenarios with just kind of putting Yonkers on hold.
Yep.
Is that if staff can continue then with negotiating for property acquisition, we still have a fallback that we own, so we've not lost nothing at that point. Is that?
I just would hate to get us trapped in a point, to the point where we discover we can't fund.
Well, I think the virtue of the one that we own, one that we don't,
Right.
is that we can always build on that central power
Absolutely.
station. We can do
Okay.
it.
That positions you well for negotiations.
Right, we don't have to use this.
Yes.
And we will not put ourselves in a position where we have to proceed
Yeah,
with
wanna-
acquisition either. And this will be a classic situation where we maintain an option at a nominal cost
Yeah.
until such time as the township board makes that decision. Now,
Smart.
Yep.
there's gonna have to be a decision point, and it's probably going to be earlier than people prefer because we're going to be paying some sort of carrying cost. Staff will begin work on that if that's the direction.
Okay. So are we all, I saw mostly agreement about this. Are we all in that same headspace that we're looking at the driving range, the central fire station with Yonkers in our back pocket?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay.
Yes.
Well,
We've got our marching orders.
thank you. I also, just since we're on, as we're wrapping up that topic, I do think it's worth exploring with our township attorney whether or not we can identify other funds that we can use to look at defraying the cost of that, if some of that parcel can be used for parks or land pres or anything like that. I think that would be an interesting way to bring the overall cost of the project down.
Very helpful.
Absolutely.
All right, well.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. So that concludes the site selection location analysis agenda item. Before we get to public remarks, which we added to our agenda here, I do want to point out that in our first meeting, we established the November 12th board meeting as the first check-in with the township board. And so I would ask if there are 2 volunteers who'd be willing to come to that board meeting to offer what is essentially a 4 to 5 minute discussion or a presentation of what occurred at this meeting, at these meetings so far. We do start at 6 o'clock on Tuesdays here in this room, first and third Tuesday, in this case, November 12th. Are there anyone who'd be willing to volunteer to go first? Member
How's that?
Baisner?
Mayor, do
I
I
appreciate
join?
Actually, I have conflict with park
Okay.
commission, so, and I
that's
think
right, it's
it's
park
a
commission
good
night.
idea to have people other than.
That's true.
Further to school and you.
So can you come as well, you said? Okay, so we'll have you 2 come then for the November meeting, and then we'll reassess as we get to the January meeting, which is our next option. It's not on our agenda this time, but perhaps Manager Schmidt can put this on our agenda for next time. I did hear that we have a meeting scheduled for spring break, which I know our two school folks may not be available for. Turns out I'm out of the country as well that day.
We missed that one completely because this year, I don't think anyone's going to be available. So
Yeah.
we'll look at our options.
There's got to be another Tuesday in March if we
We'll
can.
find one. I want everyone to also be aware that if we're probably going to have to push it up, right? And so it gets earlier in the month. What that may lead us towards is then wanting to meet one last time at the very beginning of April. But it's on our radar to reschedule that meeting. We just need to figure out what our options are.
All right, so we'll see that before us at our next meeting.
Yeah, that'll be our housekeeping item for the next meeting.
Great, thank you. So next we come to public remarks. Anyone from the public wishing to make remarks at this time? I don't see anyone. If you'd like to come to the podium. It's just we're broadcasting this for the folks at home, so it'll be helpful if everyone can hear.
Right here?
Yes, please. If you could give us your name and address for the record, if you would.
Oh, okay. Kathy Harrison, Okemos resident. I was going through the packet from your first meeting, and I know that you mentioned, it looks like Superintendent Hood gave an update about money that was allocated during the bond. Now, is that only specifically money that would come to this project if it was on an Okemos Schools site?
Yes.
So if we pick one of these other sites, there's no money from the bond?
Correct.
Okay, okay. Yeah, because that was kind of left, unstated in the question. And then I guess the other question I have is, how did it ultimately come to a decision to include a community center along with the required senior center?
Sure. Well, so to be clear, nothing's required, right? We are.
Well, the money came from the state for a senior center.
Yeah, there was a $5 million grant from the state. And the community center has been something that has been amongst the township board's goals for a number of years, and was partly born out of the community surveys that we do on a triennial basis. One of the things that was mentioned in our 2021 survey as something that residents want to see, in addition, was a community center. They wanted us to explore that. And so here, looking at, possibly building a senior center, and looking at the opportunity to perhaps do something else that our residents also wanted. I think the township board, when they made their goals back in 2022, viewed that as an opportunity to explore both options.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any other members of the public wishing to speak? All right, seeing none. Our next item for is adjournment. Do we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
It's been moved. Do we have a second? Second. Supported by Member Robertson. All those in favor of adjournment say aye. Aye. Any opposed? And we stand adjourned at 8:05 PM.